starting out with a quick announcement before we dive into today's episode. We are having a free masterclass on January 30th from 12 to 1 Eastern Time, and the topic is Shape Up Your Weekly Executive Team Meetings for a High Impact Year. So, whether you're tackling tough meeting challenges or fine tuning an already strong meeting culture, you're not going to want to miss these 7 game changing tactics. Register today at capstoneleadership.net/upcoming events or email us at info@capstoneleadership.net and we'll send you a registration link, or you'll see it in the show notes below.
And so I think about this in terms of, think about if you were a young couple with young kids or newborn or something like that, and in not having time for a one-on-one or date night with your significant other. That's your ability to reconnect and become regrounded and not lose touch of what that relationship means. And in the workplace, it's not too different too. Our little kid might be our patients or clients or whatever it is that keeps us super busy and even tired, but we have to be able to regroup and come back together and realign frequently to determine if we're headed in the same direction.
Welcome to Culture Change RX, the podcast for healthcare professionals that are committed to creating a thriving workplace culture, improving the experiences of employees and patients, and ultimately unlocking their organization's next level of potential. I'm Sue Tetzlaff, your host and co-founder of Capstone Leadership Solutions. Join me and my insightful guests each week as we share actionable insights for navigating the crucial people side of the business of healthcare. Subscribe now for a weekly dose of Culture Change RX. Now let's dive into this week's conversation where culture change takes center stage. Welcome to another episode of Culture Change RX. It's me, Sue Tetzlaff, here with you again today. And today's one of those days where I have the pleasure of having a guest in the studio. And I have Rob Lion here with me today. And he is going to introduce himself, give a little context and background to why he's on a podcast about culture change. And then we're going to dive into a topic that we selected for our conversation today, which is one-on-one conversations. Let's take it away, Rob.
Terrific. Well, thanks, Stu. I'm excited to be here. So, as you mentioned, my name is Rob, and I'm a professor at Idaho State University. Put in some time in Michigan at different universities there. So that's one of our touch points together. But I am a professor of human resource development, and I just so happen to work with my wife in a company that we created several years ago called Black River Performance Management, where our motto is pretty simple. That work should fuel the human spirit, not drain it. And we look to optimize organizational performance, but not at the expense of the individual. Our belief, our goal, especially my goal, is that people go home at the end of the day, their fuel tank's still partially full, and bringing their soul with them so that they can love and live in accordance to how they want to spend their time when they're not working.
We have a lot in common, more than just our location and love of Michigan. We have a lot of similarities in thoughts around workplaces and the joy of work and the love of work and what it should do or not do for us as humans. So I love that. How long have you had your company, Rob?
So we're 7 years old now. And before that, I was doing my own little private practice types of dabbling. But yeah, so we've been in existence for 7 years. If any of your listeners are curious about moving into the consulting space, I'm sure you'd share some of the sentiments here. The first couple of years are rough. It is building and prospecting and learning who your audience truly is. And so after several years, we're in a good spot now. We're about 90% referral based. We have clients all around the world and we just love what we're doing. And something I didn't mention is that our work, my work in particular, is based around the psychology of work. And so we work with all industries because there are people in all industries. And so that's where our specialization is. So whether it is mining and natural resources or financial institutions, governments, things like that, we work with all those people that are interested in infusing this culture first, human centric framework to help their people thrive.
That's fantastic. It is needed everywhere. I know that in our company, Capstone, we're really focused on small and rural healthcare organizations. But we do hear from people all the time where they say, the things you're talking about, the stuff that you're recommending for them are things that other industries can use and would benefit from. And I know that to be true. It's just not where I play.
Right, right.
So, yeah, that's fantastic. And then you have some love for education too, which I think in our work as consultants and trainers and coaches, we're doing a lot of education anyway, but you're actually doing some work in academia as well in the human resources area. So that's just a lovely blend.
Yeah, I feel really fortunate, right? Because this consulting piece dovetails so nicely with the teaching piece because my students are actually they're undergraduate and graduate students that are working professionals. So they are coming to our program to look to upskill, maybe move into leadership ranks, maybe even change tracks and go to a different industry in more of a leadership role. And so we get to play with the real life and the academic life frameworks in and out. And we base our teachings around models and frameworks that are vetted through science. But at the same time, we recognize that the pace of the world is different than academia. And so we try to present things in accordance to what it is like in real life so that when they leave the classroom, it's scalable for them. It's relatable. And in fact, all of the assignments in my courses in particular, and for the most part, our program are industry based assignments. So everyone is tasked with bringing in projects from their life or from people that they work with or from the lives that I've interacted with so that they can see it in as real time and as real as possible.
That sounds very much like my master's program in healthcare administration from the University of Minnesota. I was in their
Yep.
executive study program back in the day before online education was even available. And I couldn't be a day student because I was a working executive as
Yeah.
a healthcare leader already. And I just needed to get that master's degree while working. And so every one of our projects was based on, we had to pull it right from our own organization. And if we were applying finance, it was our finances. If it was risk management, it was our risk management. If it was HR, it was our HR. So yeah, it was like studying and learning your organization from a whole different angle than actually working in it. It was a lot of
Yeah.
fun.
It's such a rich experience, right? Because you're not relying on case studies that you have no relationship with. And also how detailed can someone get in a 13, 15, 20 page case, right? So this is, yeah, I love it. I feel so fortunate
Yeah.
and I'm grateful for the opportunities both our companies have given us and as well as the university.
Yeah, fabulous. Well, hey, let's jump into our meaty topic of the day, which is
Yes.
one-on-ones. So we met a while back and we were talking about all things we love about culture and leadership. And we realized that this topic is one that so many people could benefit from hearing your perspectives on this in particular. I think that it's not probably an unfamiliar topic or tactic, but I think that like with many, sometimes we don't maybe understand them in such a way that we can really get the most impact and optimize them. So let's go after this one, Rob. So tee this up so that our audience can get the most value from your wisdom here.
So, what was interesting for me in my first professional role, one on ones was a standard practice. And so I grew up in that professional role with regular one on ones. Were they great? Were they good? Who knows? Like they were all I knew at that point. And it wasn't until I left that organization and left that industry and started to shift and started to learn more about other organizations that I didn't realize I was taking it for granted that it's such a powerful development grounds to having individual needs met as well as moving forward in concert with your leader. And so the reason why I was sincerely interested in discussing this with you, because you probably see this too, is that I run into so many organizations that aspire to have them and they don't live up to those aspirations, that they might be loosely calendared or they might be canceled or they just might not even exist. And it's such a missed opportunity for both the leader in terms of a leader objectives and direction, as well as the person that is the direct report and really cherishing and valuing their time and providing them the feedback they need in that session. where did I come up with some of what I approach? And just to give you a little bit of a framework, because we were chatting about this early, that you picked up on how I was writing about one-on-ones in our email correspondence. And I actually had them as 1v1s, as
Mhm.
like when I was in the world of sports and it was a one-on-one type of competition, but that is not what my heart is in. So that actually came from as I was cutting my teeth as a manager. I really leveraged some sports frameworks because I went to college for sports. Made a lot of sense. And I really introduced and positioned myself, my teams as a coach. And not like a coach like we know it today. This was before people really talked about coaches. But what I observed in that coaching rank of you're a person that's responsible for not only one person, but several. You are as much of a teacher as you are holding people accountable and these different things. And so I use that coaching metaphor frequently in my junior leadership phase. And so it kind of trickled over into my one-on-one
It sure
structures and
did.
things like that.
I was like, what do you actually call these? Because we were talking about the fact that, like it's good, like in an organization where they're branded with a name. If
Yeah.
it's this is how we do it around here, that
Yeah.
leaders lead in this way and they use this tool and this tactic is that, it has a name, it has, an understanding in the organization of what it means to be part of this. I mean, it can be an individual leader's practice that maybe the organization doesn't adopt that as a leadership wide tactic, but it is best when the entire organization does adopt it and gives it a name and a structure and all of that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. A cultural standard, right? An expectation, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's really powerful when you're onboarding people with a cultural centric framework to be able to say, look, this is how we value our people. We give our people these opportunities to ask questions and, getting ahead of ourselves here, but also provide leaders with feedback in a routine manner, not just through some anonymous ambiguous annual survey. And the same thing goes true with the direct reports, providing them drips of feedback, helping keeping them on track, as well as making small corrective actions so that there's no surprises whenever that annual review comes out.
Yeah, you're talking about a lot of the whys or the reasons and the benefits. In our work, when we tee these up, one of the big whys, and you kind of spoke to it, is really that relationship piece, is really having that proactive time together. Sometimes in the busyness of work,
Mm-hmm.
as leaders or otherwise, the time we spend together sometimes is not proactively purposeful, pointed on the relationship and, carving out and holding space for that time together. It's usually in the moment reactive, very pointed as what we need to accomplish tasky wise versus
Yeah.
really focusing on our relationship.
Well, I think about some of the conversations I've had with people over the years and clients and things. And because we're in a role of troubleshooting, right? And providing perspectives and solutions and options. And one of them in particular said, my deputy director keeps bringing ideas to me. And then he's upset when I don't act on them. We have a conversation about personality attributes and styles and identify where those conflicts are. So we start to do some coaching around look, this is how you're seeing the world. This is how he's seeing the world. Now let's take this into consideration and some other things. But outside of that, I said, well, how frequently having one-on-ones? And she said, well, we're not. I said, what do you mean you're not? She's like, we do it, we're around each other so much and in passing. I said, you're setting yourself up for real challenges here, right? Because you're a
Mhm.
much more methodical, slower paced kind of processing type of person. And he's really fast paced and intense. That out of the gate is going to create a certain level of conflict. And so you need to protect your time and you need to value his time and set up some standards and guidelines. And that's where that one-on-one really comes in to be helpful is that, Sue, here's your dedicated time for us to be together. I'm going to bring some agenda items in. And then here are your opportunities for the specific agenda items you want, right? As well as then having these conversations to recalibrate or shift, right? So if you were the fast paced person and I was the slower paced person, it would give me an opportunity to clarify that I need a little bit more time to reflect upon your proposal. I like where you're going with this. Give me a week or two to get back to you at your next one-on-one. And that really does demonstrate to them that you value their time, you value their input, But also, we just can't do things on the fly. I might have to get this approved by a director or a supervisor, or I have to check with finance to determine if this is in accordance to what we're doing. It's like anything else. We don't know what we don't know. So the person coming in with all these ideas might just see me as obstructive, right? As
Mm-hmm.
opposed to really concerned and wanting to do this. But it protects this time for us to have some of these conversations to test expectations and determine steps forward.
And when we don't have space for that, then that's the stuff that just doesn't usually happen because we just, that's what goes by the wayside. So when we kind of get this protected time, it kind of allows you to lean into things like this that you might not want to open that conversation in that moment outside of this dedicated time. No, you brought up a really good point too of the leader that says, well, we're together all the time. And so do we really need this formality? And I do remember we work with small organizations. So some of the leaders that we work with might only have one person to spend one-on-one time with, they might have one employee. And that leader said to me, she's like, we sit in an office right next to each other with desks
Right.
next to each other. Like it seems almost silly to dedicate time for this on a regular basis for this specific purpose. I said, give it a try. Just give it a try. And she said it was magical. The amount of things she learned and they talked about that they wouldn't have talked about every day sitting next to each other in the desks next to each other. It's just amazing. She was fascinated. She was sold.
Yeah. It's the parallels in the culture work of home life to work life is really strong, right? Like, so there's things that, if you have a different career trajectory than your significant other, you might not truly know what they do. But cultures are it's a dynamic concept that spans industries and practices, right? And so I think about this in terms of, think about if you were a young couple with young kids or newborn or something like that, and in not having time for a one-on-one or date night with your significant other, that's your ability to reconnect and become regrounded and not lose touch of what that relationship means. And in the workplace, it's not too different too. Our little kid might be our patients or clients or whatever it is that keeps us super busy and even tired, but we have to be able to regroup and come back together and realign frequently to determine if we're headed in the same direction.
That's such a good point, Rob. This is interesting. Like, I've been teaching this stuff for decades now and promoting it and doing it myself. And I've never used that analogy of how it would be in a relationship at home if you didn't have this special time to reconnect and to build your relationship. So it is so relevant.
So there's a little bit more than I'll share on this. So what we know is, as it relates to initiatives and interventions and transfer, so training transfer to the workplace. So you go in and you work with your clients and you're introducing new concepts. The efficacy of the transfer is sometimes challenged in your workplace. And so we can improve that efficacy of that transfer by actually taking the lessons and the concepts and leveraging them back to our personal life, where we have a little bit more intimate standings and experiences with people in our lives, whether it's friends, family, what have you, and learn how to apply it and see it through that lens. And then we use that to prospect and determine, how do I make this happen with, say, Sue at the office, that I know Sue is on a little bit more superficial level, and start to build those bridges that way. And so there is a lot of value to that. So it's not even just about that one-on-one and bringing it back and forth, but any of the things we do with our staff, there is an out of work application. And I know I run into challenges with that when I talk to clients. But one of the things we do pitch is that any of these initiatives, leadership framework, stuff like that, all have relevance and bearing on home life. And sometimes people are not interested in that. They think, well, this is all about work. And the reality is there's no clean, definitive line or a wall between work and home. Even though you pass through the door to leave in the morning to go to work, doesn't mean your problems don't follow you. I think we do ourselves a favor by continuing to regard the organization as just a larger extension of our life.
Yeah. I was reminded of that this morning. I was talking to one of our CEOs at one of the hospitals we work with, and we were talking a bit about the impact of this work on our employees and our leaders. And I was reminded of a leader who, when I was talking to him about how leading in these new ways, learning these things was impacting him, and he started to cry and he said, I am a better father, grandfather,
Awesome.
husband because I'm doing this work, I'm learning this stuff. And to your point is, right away, he could see how it was changing what he was doing outside of work too.
Hmm. Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Congratulations. That's big stuff. That's changing the
Yeah.
world, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We always say that when you strengthen a community hospital, you strengthen the community. But, we say that in a lot of ways. It's an important community asset and it's important for access to care. It's a largest employer, whatever. But I think it's more to the point, Rob, that when employees, when leaders feel differently about their work and their day and their organizations and their contributions to their community hospital, that impacts them as humans outside of work too, with their
Hmm.
kids, if they're coaching, if they're working at their church, if they're, interacting with their friends, it's impacting them there too.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question for you. What are some of your thoughts about some of the best practices for one-on-ones that you propose?
Yeah. Well, one is that there isn't one way for each
Yeah.
leader to make this successful in their day or in their life, in their work life. So I am really about starting kind of hyper prescribed if it's an entire organization learning to do this. In fact, that CEO I was talking to this morning, they're brand new at starting this. And so we like to start being kind of prescriptive on the what, why, and how,
Hmm.
and then really letting people make it theirs and make it better. I think there's a core, like in an organization, to be synergistic around this. There has to be some very core things that are part of it that make it synergistic and positive for the organization, a value of time and energy, because we need a return on investment for all of that. So I do think that just to get it started, one of the recommendations I would have is to start with something, even if it's not where each leader or the entire organization ends up. And then in particular, for example, is it scheduled or unscheduled? Some leaders can pull it off where it's unscheduled. Like we always will find a time on whatever the timeline is, and we will always make it happen and we'll never miss. But it's not a set time every month on this day and time. Da, da, da. Other leaders, it would never happen if it wasn't calendarized and consistent, right? So sometimes we think it's one way or another, and it could be either or,
Yeah.
and so I think about that. And I do also, some of the ideas I have is starting and ending on a positive. I really think
Hmm.
that that's important. I think oftentimes when we get together, like usually there's some pent up stuff, and it's usually the negative stuff that needs to come out or needs to be talked about in this conversation. And we've been waiting for it, but it's not always a good place to start. So I love starting and ending on a positive in these encounters, if at all possible. It doesn't always end up that,
Right.
but going into it with that mindset. And then I also like the idea of really being prepared with being purposeful. Like it just can't be superficial or just talking about the weather. It really needs to be purposeful stuff. It doesn't all have to be like extremely deep, and we don't have to go every place in these conversations, but again, they just have to be, you prepare. You
Hmm.
have to put some thought and preparation into getting the biggest bang for your buck for this time, because nobody has time to waste, even though you also want it to be even some space for whatever else needs to be said and heard and talked about, but that there's some at least intent and purpose in your mind
Absolutely.
about what do I need to accomplish in this time? And that the other person comes in with that same kind of preparation and thought. We're not winging it. We're not wasting this time. And it's very purposeful.
Well, that approach is really nice, right? Because it gives autonomy to the organization. Because I suspect you've done this in other instances where you're like, okay, so I didn't give you enough structure and you're not doing it. So you didn't follow through where we needed to be. So now let's build more structure. And that's their
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to own it, right? I think about it, I approach it a couple different ways. One of the things that comes to mind is I have a lot of people I've worked with, as well as students, that are they're serving others. So they approach their work as a servant to their team that they want to support. But when they're frustrated and tired, I hear from them to say, I just can't get my work done. I can't plan. I'm always taking care of other people's stuff, right? So they haven't really looked at the boundary issue. And the one-on-one is a great tactic to recalibrate how much time you're giving away to each other, right? So one of the things I propose, and this number is totally arbitrary, but make the one-on-one 60% about the report, 40% about the leader. That this is the time for the leader to provide some relevant, timely information, but really this is the report's time to seek clarity, to ask for feedback, to gain information about resources, things like that. And what I think super powerful is that when leaders counsel, they're sending a message to their people, whether it's intentional or not. And unfortunately, that they're not valuing or appreciating their time. And so by living in accordance to these one-on-ones and having a disciplined practice here, I'm showing you as your supervisor that, you know what, everything else in my life, unless it's a real big issue we can't escape, this is your time and I'm here for you. A couple other things that come to mind that I work with people on. So I talk about timing. I remember because we all have certain times during the day where we're sharp, more bright, right? More effective, more efficient. And for me, what I remember doing in my junior careers, I quickly realized that first thing in the morning was the time that I'm most productive. And so I need to protect that time and not do one-on-ones at that time because that's my creative time. But what I ended up doing, which was a mistake, is I pushed them to the end of the day, and that was my fatigue time. And as a supervisor, I wasn't able to be present well enough, consistent enough for my team. So what I've learned is that I have to find that sweet spot between my energy and their energy. And that's where we have this opportunity to make it about us as this one-on-one unit and determine what that structure is. It doesn't need to be an hour. It doesn't need to be 45 minutes, but it needs to be purposeful, like you mentioned. And I've always approached it as structured. I actually structured a skeleton agenda before we had document sharing, and now with document sharing, it's so easy because we can both populate it. These are the topics we're going to come in to discuss. I could bring the resource answers at that point, but at the bottom of it, I always had here's the feedback section that this is the feedback I'm giving you. And I believe in drips of feedback. So every month or every 2 weeks, you would get some sort of both positive and corrective feedback. And overall, they tend to be more positive than corrective, but it's a way to make sure that we're moving together consistently in sync, right? But then I also would have on there opportunities for you to give me feedback, which I recognize is a real challenge when we talk about power and roles. But the beautiful thing is that if I keep telling you what feedback do you have for me enough, either something's going to rise to the top or you're going to feel supported, psychologically safe to be able to share. And it became really powerful. It was a reflection, and it is a reflection of the vibrance of the culture we've created. And it was, as a junior leader, it was really helpful for me because my staff eventually, they knew I had their back. They knew I valued their perspective. And they would speak up and even share things like, I just want to bring this to your attention, Rob, that part of the people that sit on that side of the room feel like you're not including them in the conversation because you're not looking over there, or this is what's happening. You should know about it. And it was really powerful because this was a reflection of the investment in our culture for them to say this. They knew I wouldn't lash out. They knew I would take it to heart, try to correct it. And in many instances, they would even say, look, I want to share this with you. You don't need to do anything with it. I'm taking care of it myself because we have this camaraderie there. And so what I see is that rich culture is partially a reflection of the quality of the one-on-one we've created, where it's, once again, I'm showing you that I'm valuing and appreciating your time, making good use of your time, showing up on time, showing up prepared. And when I treat you in accordance like that, I know you're treating the next person, your colleague, in accordance like that. And so it's kind of a passive approach to bolstering up our culture.
Yeah. Rob, that is so beautifully said about how, these one-on-ones really start to reflect our culture, like define our culture, support our culture in that our workforce feels heard, they feel valued, their voice is heard, they've given an opportunity to give voice. We like to say that the follow up and follow through is the secret sauce of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
So the things that we hear, we can't do everything with everything we hear, but when there is something important that is for us to do in follow up and we do that, we're building trust, and we can circle back next time to say in follow up to last time, this is different or done or whatever. So yeah, the one-on-ones, you can't really underestimate the impact of one tactic in sending a message to your entire organization. I had a CEO one time, his leaders were giving me a little pushback, about, we don't have time for this, right? We don't have time for this. And he says, if we're going to say our people are most important, how can we say we don't have time for them? Those two things don't go together. If we say we value our people and our culture, and then on the other hand say we can't spend time with them, then we're not walking the talk. And so after he was so bold about that message about the incongruence there, they started happening more.
Good. It's a real interesting message we send to our teams, our staffs, our organizations when we say we prioritize the person, and especially our customers or patients or clients. Yet we don't live in accordance to that in our practices with our own people in our own team. And so, yeah, that's a great example.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll share one more thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the biggest challenges I see in organizations, and this is going to directly relate to the one-on-one. One of the biggest challenges I see in organizations is that leaders struggle with providing feedback and accountability. And that's where our performance consistently is off track because of that absence of that skill. And in many instances, it's because we have too big of a heart. Like, I don't want to hurt Sue's feelings. I'm not going to, what I mean?
In healthcare, this is a big thing, Rob.
Yeah,
It's
that's
a
why
big
I
thing.
bring
I'm
it
a
up.
nursing leader.
Yeah, it's a big thing in everything, right? But here's the thing. We need to get a better handle and a better angle on that. So however we're going to accomplish this, we got to figure it out. And the one-on-one creates the breeding ground for this. When you're doing those frequent one-on-ones and those frequent drips, you create that opportunity to have more intimate conversations that are more easily had. So I remember, and I share this often with people, I was raised in a family that was very conflict averse, that I didn't learn how to have difficult conversations, and I carried that into my life, and it made a mess of certain areas of my life. But what I've also learned is that I can learn anything. And what we learn is that once we do it once, it actually doesn't end up being as bad as what we made it out in our head.
Yeah.
And even let's take this one step further. One of the things I recommend to people is that in those one-on-ones, come in with a scripted conversation, that accountability conversation bullet pointed out, because it's too easy when we're going to just try to do it off the top of our head that we're not going to have the composure and maybe not even the guts, right, to do it. And it'll be too easy to turn your head and say, I'll do it next time. And I take that even further. I encourage my clients and my students to say, to the extent of, Sue, I have something I want to discuss with you. It's tough for me to bring it up. So all I ask is just give me a couple moments and let me read through my notes to get it out. And then I'm happy to answer any questions you have about it.
That's a great tactic.
And when you have culture on your side,
and a relationship on your side that's been built from every conversation before, those conversations get so much easier when we're coming from a relationship. I know they say that like relationship and communication are so connected, like chicken and the egg, which came first?
Yeah.
We have a great relationship because we have great communication, or we have great communication because we have a great relationship. It's like, well, it's both, like they're so connected. I don't know what came first, but they're so connected. The relationship's poor, communication's usually poor. If communication's poor, then the relationship is poor, or vice versa. So this is an investment for sure. And it does make future feedback so much easier, and accountability, which Feedback is part of that. If we have the relationship and we've had difficult conversations, we've had frank conversations, they get more frank over time.
Yeah. Yeah. That relationship, or when I talk to some other people, I talk about culture, is the grease to this difficult conversation gears. It doesn't mean I'm still not going to upset you, right? Like,
Yeah.
because but here's the other side of it. In most of these difficult conversation situations, we already know we dropped the ball to some extent.
Yeah.
And if I actually don't have that conversation, if this is our regular one-on-one and you've been underperforming the last 2 weeks or missing out a lot on work or, something that's out of the norm that's causing disruption for our team or our organization, and we go into that one-on-one and I don't raise that as a conversation piece, I just cut my legs out from under me as the leader. And now you start to wonder, well, clearly he's not in charge here. Like, maybe I'll just keep
Or it
having
doesn't
2 hour
really
lunches.
matter.
Yeah,
Or it doesn't matter.
exactly.
Yeah.
And then other people see it too.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
even though those private conversations are not happening, they know that you've been late daily. They know that you're not hitting your marks, and they know that they're not being held accountable either. So they're like, why should I step up?
Yeah.
Sue isn't.
True. Yeah. Yeah. Everybody's watching. Yeah. For sure they're watching. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they're not looking in the mirror maybe too often, but they are watching everyone else around them. Yeah. Well, Joyce, this has just been such a wonderful conversation. I told you we would look down and realize how fast time flies when you're talking about something amazing like culture and one-on-ones. The geek in me I could talk about this for hours. So, but we won't today. Is there any last minute things we got? Still the cameras are rolling and recorders are going. Is there any last minute parting things that you'd like to mention about one-on-ones or anything else?
Yeah. So when I work with teams, what I basically end with is the same thing: is there's no better time than now to start this change of this practice. And what's super powerful is when I have a group of 25 in front of me and I know that they're struggling with this, I kind of clear some way for that leader to start having those conversations and almost to some extent give people forewarning that you should expect these conversations to start soon. And that's going to be a part of our path forward. The unfortunate thing is that is this belief in the self-talk of how busy we are gets in the way, or the ego and insecurity and the lack of skills, even though we all actually possess the material to do this, the ability to do this, that we still just feign away and resort to maybe not doing it in some instances. So I say, no better time than now to start. Be bold and be brave. And also lead with a little love and compassion, because I think that will be reciprocated in those conversations.
Yeah. We call it mustering the will and mastering the skill. And it really takes
wonderful
to do this, and sometimes it's the mustering the will that's actually the harder part. The skill is actually really not that difficult. It is really about having the will to do it. And like you say, get out of your head about, I don't have time. That's just not a good excuse. I don't have time for my people, right? I had a leader one time, a CEO, come to me and he goes, my leaders say that they're getting feedback from their employees that they're, doing too many, well, they call them roundings, one-on-ones. And I'm like, well, if the employees are saying my leader's spending too much time with me, I just can't believe that. Like, I can't believe an employee is saying my leader's giving me too much time and attention in a good way, like a positive way. They're making time for me. They're listening to me. Like, they can't be doing it right. Like, we got to look at what they're doing if their employees are saying, I don't want that. Right.
Yeah. That's wonderful.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. Yeah. Thank you, Rob, for sharing your view on a very important cultural topic, which is one-on-one time and building relationships and spending time together, giving feedback and having great conversations and developing and strengthening relationships. So important to culture. Thanks for bringing that forward on the podcast, Rob. Thank you very much. Where can people reach you?
Yeah, good question. So the two easiest ways to find me, our company website, Black River, just as you typically spell it, with the letter P for performance and the letter M for management. So blackriverpm.com. As soon as you get on the website, you'll have an opportunity to subscribe to the newsletter if you want to hear what's going on in the world as it relates to us. Just hit X if you don't, and then scroll down and you have contact information there. Then also on LinkedIn, first name's Rob, last name's Lion, but it's spelled like lion, Lion. So just do a search for Rob and then last name Lion, and we should be able to find each other there. And just don't hesitate to reach out. Love to hear your feedback, thoughts, comments, and questions. Happy to discuss this stuff further with others.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Rob, for what you and your wife and your company are doing through your work there at Black River, and also the work you're doing to educate students. So it's great that you're taking on that role as well. So thank you, Rob.
Thanks, Sue.
Thanks for tuning in to Culture Change RX. If you found value in today's episode and you are a believer in fostering change in healthcare, join us in making a difference. Follow, rate, and review our podcast on your favorite platform. Share it with colleagues and your network. Together, we can make a lasting impact. Until next week, keep inspiring positive change.